Okay, welcome everyone. I'd like to introduce our special guest this evening. Wendy Holden, also known as Taylor Holden, is a novelist, nonfiction author, historical biographer, and ghostwriter, as well as a former journalist for the London Daily Telegraph. Her books have sold over 2 million copies, have been adapted for television and radio, and some have been adopted into the school's curriculum. 4 of her titles have been optioned for film. Since leaving newspapers in 1996, Wendy has written more than 40 books, including 16 international bestsellers and the acclaimed novel The Sense of Paper, published by Random House, New York, now available as an ebook. Her best-selling title is Born Survivors, the true story of 3 young mothers who hid their pregnancies from the Nazis and gave birth in the camps. This has now been published in 24 countries and translated into 16 languages. A reporter for 18 years, Wendy covered news events at home and abroad, including conflicts in the Middle East, communist Europe, and Northern Ireland. Her nonfiction titles have chiefly been the autobiographies of remarkable women, many with wartime experiences, such as Susanna Ruzakova, who survived 3 concentration camps and slave labor to become one of the world's leading musicians. Her book behind Enemy Lines was about a young Jewish woman who repeatedly crossed German lines as a spy. Several of Wendy's books have been serialized in national newspapers and magazines around the globe, selected for BBC Radio's Book of the Week and elsewhere, and transferred to both commercial television and radio drama. She also writes screenplays, is an international public speaker, literary festival chair, and teaches creative writing online and at exclusive venues in Italy, Dubai, and around the UK. Wendy divides her time between the UK, US, and Italy, but lives mostly in Suffolk, England, with her husband and dogs, where she likes to relax in her award-winning garden. She also writes occasional articles for newspapers and magazines, including The Telegraph, Guardian, Mail, and The Lady. Welcome, Wendy.
Well, welcome to me. Yes, thank you very much. When I listen to all that, I think no wonder I'm tired.
Exactly. I mean, there isn't anything you haven't done, and I think it's fantastic. So
If you want something done, ask a busy woman, right?
exactly. So we're going to obviously talk about your fantastic new book. Hopefully, everyone can see not my name, but I'll move back a bit. The Teacher of Auschwitz. Trying to get a good view there. We'll get onto that in a minute. But first, let's talk about you. Let's talk about where were you born? Where did you grow up? Tell us a bit about your family.
Thank you. I was born in Pinner in northwest London, and my father had been born in India. He lived there for the first 26 years of his life, and he fought the Japanese in Burma. He was born in 1920. My mother was born in 1924, and she was in London. She survived the London Blitz, and her fiance was in the parachute regiment, and he was shot and killed parachuting into Holland. I grew up with war, if you like, as part of our background. My grandfather had fought in the First World War on my mother's side, and a great healthy respect for war. I also had a healthy respect for books because my father was a phenomenal reader. He actually outread his local library of all the books that he wanted to read, and he was an amazing man and my hero and my inspiration. And because of his love of reading, I think I became an avid reader as well. I was one of 4, but I was the one that kind of read the most. I was this kind of the family swat, and I because I think when you read so much, you have a natural inclination to write. So I started to write very early on. I wrote my first school play when I was 6, called The Queen's Birthday Cake, and horribly precocious, monstrous child I must have been. But it was something that was always in me. I was always writing poems and keeping diaries, and I can remember going to a school's sort of careers advice, and they asked me what I wanted to be, and I said, well, I'm going to write books. And they said, well, you're only 11, and um, most people, if you want to go that route, most people become a journalist. And I said, well, what's that? And they said, well, newspapers, people who write in newspapers. Oh, my parents read a newspaper. Well, okay, well, why didn't you do that first? So off I went and became a journalist for my parents' newspaper in the end, the Telegraph. And I did that it was going to be a temporary stopgap before becoming an author, but I was there for 18 years. as a journalist, not just at the Telegraph, 10 years there. And I became a foreign and war correspondent for them. So again, war started to feature in my life. And I gave it up. I always say I gave it up to stay married and stay alive. And there's some truth in both of those statements. But I started to write books in 1991 after I'd covered the Gulf War, first Gulf War. And I've been doing it ever since. And lots of different books, different subjects, some celebrities, some dog books, because I'm passionate about dogs. But ultimately, I have settled into writing about war. And I feel that's kind of like how my whole life's come full circle to put me in that position to write about war. I feel that I've got the experience, the background, the compassion, and the interest. I've got great curiosity about war, and I've been writing about war pretty much nonstop since about 2010.
Amazing. Wonderful. So before we get on to this wonderful book, let's just quickly discuss Born Survivors. Was that your first Holocaust related book?
It was the first proper Holocaust book. Well, I wrote a book in 2002 called Behind Enemy Lines about a young Jewish spy, Marta Cohen, who is still alive at 105, and her husband's 106. And they live in Los Angeles. She's 4'6" or 7" or something. Absolute firecracker of a woman. And she was amazing, and she had an incredible life, and lost a sister to Auschwitz, but she ended up going behind enemy lines because she was small, blonde, pretty, didn't look Jewish, and she went back as a spy to find out and report on what was happening and where the Germans were, and in her own way help save the war. And then Born Survivors came to me in 2014. And that's the true story of 3 young mothers who hid their pregnancies from the Nazis and gave birth in the camps. And that was really the book that turned everything around for me and made me realize that that's where my passion lay. Looking for those incredible stories of the human spirit, the resilience of the human spirit, and looking for the humanity in the inhumanity. And really, Born Survivors was an extraordinary project for me that ended up being published worldwide and taking me all over the world with the 3 babies. Eva Clark, who many of you may know, who lives here and is wonderful, and Mark Olsky, Dr. Mark Olsky in Wisconsin, and Hannah Berger Moran in San Francisco. Extraordinary, remarkable people, all of them 80 this April. And we're going back to Mauthausen, where Eva was born, and where that they were all liberated in 1945. We've been invited back by the Viennese government in May.
That's wonderful. It's such a big year. So Eva Clark, for anyone on this talk, is an AJR member, and I got to see her a couple of weeks, well, not last week actually, at Wendy's book launch, and she's all excited to be traveling with Wendy and doing this. And it's, as Wendy mentioned, her 80th birthday coming up and the 80th anniversary, and it's just such a big year. So that trip's going to be pretty amazing, I think.
Yeah,
amazing.
We got Chicago first. We've been invited to Chicago because it was the Illinois Holocaust. It was the armored division from Illinois that liberated Mauthausen. And so when we launched that book in North America, we launched at Illinois Holocaust Museum. So we've got a nice relationship and friendship with them, and they've invited us back to their big liberation gala where the babies and I are kind of like the surprise guests. And I think there's 2,000 delegates to that. So that's going to be interesting too.
Well, especially as a surprise, that's going to be quite an emotional surprise for everyone, isn't it? It's and here they are. So wow.
Yeah, in fantastic fettle. I mean, they're just amazing. They've got so much energy, and Eva particularly, and just wind her up and off she goes. She's like little Energizer bunny. She's unbelievable and done so much for Holocaust education in the last 20 odd years, and she's an absolute example to us all.
Yeah, agreed. Wonderful. So let's move on to your fantastic new book, which I just finished, and I sort of I took my time. I rushed through it, but I took my time in terms of I wanted to finish it this morning. I wanted to feel it and enjoy it and just get the whole sense and everything, and of course I think it's fantastic. But let's go into let's talk about Freddie Hirsch and what led you to write The Teacher of Auschwitz.
I wrote a book in between Born Survivors and this one called 100 Miracles, and that's the true story of Zuzana Ruzhishkova's. And by the way, it took me a very long time to get that name right. Her life story. And she was a teenage musical prodigy, a great pianist, at 15 when war broke out. And she spent from 1939 to 1945 in the camps and really almost lost the use of her hands, never mind playing the piano again. Her fingerprints were gone, her fingers were fossilized with slave labor, and she had a dreadful time, lost all her family apart from her mother. And it was a very harrowing and difficult series of interviews I did with her when she was living in Prague, age 90. And one day I spotted that there were three photographs on her desk. One was her father, one was her mother, and one was a young man who I thought at first must be a brother or something. And it was Freddie Hirsch. And when I asked her about him, the mood in the room changed completely. It was as if she was lit from within. She just beamed happiness and beamed joy and held her hand to her heart and said, "Oh, Freddie." And I just thought, oh my goodness me, what is this? We were talking about Auschwitz and we were talking about Terezin ghetto, and suddenly she was talking about this man who she worshipped so much that she had his photograph on her desk. And I needed to find out more. And the more I found out about him, the more intrigued I became. He was a young German gay Jew living in Aachen in Germany. He was the son of a master butcher. He was the second son, youngest son. He'd been born in the middle of the First World War. His father died suddenly, unexpectedly, when he was 10. His mother virtually abandoned the two boys and sort of dumped them with relatives. And they found solace in the Scout movement and youth leadership. And Freddie just took to it like a duck to water. He was amazing with the younger kids. He was very kind of militaristic in his bearing. He was very much inspired by his uncle, who had a sort of Prussian bearing. And he was just marvelous with the children. He taught them discipline, he taught them respect, he taught them to do a good deed every day. And then things got more and more difficult in Germany, of course. And as a teenager, actually, he fled to Czechoslovakia on his own, thinking it would be far enough. Of course, it wasn't. And because of his background, he was immediately enlisted by the Jewish elders to help with youth leadership in Prague for the young kids, and he set up an amazing event, weekly event at this sports ground called the Hagibor. He was very athletic. He was actually hoping to be an Olympian before the war, and he could have been. I'm sure he could have been. He was an extraordinary athlete. So he changed their lives. He gave them this bit of hope and happiness. And then, of course, when Terezin was set up as a showcase ghetto for the Jews, the elders asked him to go as one of the pioneers, to go with them to help them establish things, because they needed him and his advice on board to tell them what to do best for the children and how to manage that. It's ridiculous. He was 23, 24, 25 years old only. And really, he was taken in as a senior member of the Jewish Council to help and advise them. It's extraordinary. And he persuaded everybody to move the children out of the barracks, to put them in kinderheims. He persuaded the Nazis to allow children out for fresh air. He sought them to get extra food, extra warm clothing, and he did it without any kowtowing to anybody. He had this militaristic bearing. He would go and see them. He would look them straight in the eye. He would salute. He would click his heels together, and he would tell them what he needed. And in a strange way, they respected him. They admired his chutzpah. They admired his Aryan look. They admired his high German that he spoke. And they gave him what they wanted. And it worked and worked and worked until it didn't. And he was sent to Auschwitz because he disobeyed an order. And he went to see a new group of children who'd come into Terezin. But in Auschwitz, he did exactly the same. Immediately he got there, he persuaded the Nazis that they should take the children away, especially in the roll calls when 4 or 5-year-old children were running between legs and not keeping still, and they were losing track of numbers and so on. And he said, listen, there's an empty block. Let me have them in there. I'll do the roll call with them. I'll make sure they get fed. I'll make sure of everything, and they'll keep out of your way and keep out of their parents' way. And it'll just be a much better system. And incredibly, he set up a children's block in Auschwitz. And it was the most extraordinary thing that he did. In the shadow of the chimneys, it had Disney paintings on the walls. They sang, they danced, they put on little shows. They did the most incredible things. They became so loved by everybody that even the SS officers used to come in for respite from everything, from killing people. I mean, for most of the day, they were standing at the ramps and selecting people and sending women and children to the gas chambers. But they would come in to play with the children and give them sweets. Even Joseph Mengele, he told them to call them Uncle Pepe. And Freddie did all of this at huge risk to his life. You know, he wasn't. Those places are somewhere where you should have just kept your head down and not had eye contact with anybody, and just kept your nose clean and not draw attention to yourself in any way. And he repeatedly did so. He repeatedly went up and demanded more Red Cross parcels, some wood for the fire. Their barrack was the only one that had fires lit in winter, and more vegetables for a thicker soup. I mean, just extraordinary requests, and saved hundreds and hundreds of lives. At one point, I think he has something like 1,200 children under 15 in his care. And he had the teenagers who were in the camp, including Susanna, who followed him to Auschwitz. He had them come in and help with the children as well. So he also protected them from the roll calls and them from the gaze of the SS, and was just the most extraordinary individual to do all that. And I'm just so proud and happy that I've been able to write his story.
Wonderful, wonderful. His selflessness comes across so beautifully in your book, and just what an amazing man. Do you want to read something to us?
I wanted to bring Freddie into the room.
Please,
so
please.
This is just a one page from the prologue. And I have to tell you, I was able to choose the actor who read the audiobook. It's on audiobook too. And I get 3 actors to choose from. And I chose this one young man called George Nolan, who was wonderful. He just seemed to have the right voice. And when they first sent me the clip of him doing it, I burst into tears because I've been working so much with Freddie in my head. I felt like I knew him. I felt absolutely loved him. And suddenly this young man was speaking exactly as I imagined Freddie to speak. So if you get a chance, even if you don't buy the audiobook, go to Amazon and click on the link so you can hear that voice, because that's how Freddie sounds to me.
Great.
My name is Alfred Hirsch, although my friends call me Freddie. Please be so kind as to remember my name. The word Hirsch means stag in German, and like a deer, I've been on the run for much of my life. Today, the hunting of Freddie Hirsch may well end in a kill. I am not afraid for myself, but for the children in my care. They are all I've focused on since the world started burning, and I shudder to think what might become of them. My name is Freddie Hirsch. I am 28 years old. I am a teacher. I am a dreamer. I am not just a number, nor will I be identified by the yellow triangle I've been forced to wear. My name is Freddie Hirsch, and I've fought to maintain a vestige of normality and decency in this hellish world. I have loved and laughed, cried and almost died 1,000 times. My name is Freddie Hirsch. I am a good man. Please be so kind as to remember my name.
When you say that, when you read that, and when I read that, please remember my name, even now, it makes me cry.
Yes.
Because it's one individual, and everyone who was killed by the Nazis was a person, and they had a name. And just the way you've written that, it really pulls at your heart. Honestly, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and it's very important because I won't be revealing the ending of the book or what happened to Freddie, because I don't want to. I want people to come to that themselves. But what you do need to know is that after the war, when the communists took over, he was really denigrated by the communists for several reasons, mainly for being a homosexual, I think, but also because they called him a collaborator with the Nazis. Well, of course he collaborated with the Nazis. He had to collaborate with the Nazis to keep the children alive. He went up to them, he went to their offices, he approached, even Adolf Eichmann came to the camp, and he approached him directly and asked for a guarantee that the children would be saved from the next transport. He risked everything to do that. I mean, Adolf Eichmann could have pulled out his pistol and just shot him there and then, and would very likely have done so. But he refused to be a bystander to evil. He refused to be a bystander to the hate. He was a beacon of hope and light in a very, very dark place. And he absolutely, it seems to me, never thought about his own self and his own needs, his own desires, and what he might want and what he might want after the war. It was all just about the children. It became his passion. I suppose it became his way of dealing with the horror, the unspeakable horror that nobody can imagine, and the daily horror, that was happening every single day there, and the number of people that were dying from typhus. He became obsessed about hygiene. He had the children. He realized quickly that all the people that were dying of typhus weren't caring for themselves. They weren't making sure that the lice weren't on them, that they could give them the typhus. So he became obsessed about that. He started that regime in Terezin. He had nurses and doctors come and check and comb through hair and comb through clothing and check all the bedding and the mattresses. He made them wash every single day, even if the water was frozen and they had to break the ice in the buckets. He made them roll in the snow. He was absolutely determined to keep them alive, and he never lost a single child in his care to disease when thousands were dying around him. So he was thinking about everything. He taught them meditation. I mean, we think of that as being such a modern day mindfulness, sort of ethos that we only think about now. But he taught them to meditate, to lie quietly or sit quietly in a corner and close their eyes and imagine that their bellies were full and they weren't hungry, or to imagine that they weren't afraid, or to imagine that they didn't know where the smoke was coming from in the chimneys. He was extraordinary. He taught them games of freeze, so run somewhere, and then he shouted freeze and they had to freeze. And he did it because he knew that there might come a time when, if they were able to escape from the camp, he would have charge of hundreds and hundreds of children, and he would have to have them disciplined. He told somebody they need to be a little afraid of me. When the lady painted the walls with Snow White and the Seven Dwarves and these drab, dark barracks, she also painted he had a little, like a groom's room. It used to be a stable, that block. And there was a little groom's room at the back, and she even painted the groom's room. And she said, "What do you want me to put on there?" And he said, "Hansel and Gretel and the Wicked Witch at the door," because he wanted the children to think of him a little bit like that. Although he loved them and he hugged them and he was so great with them, he also wanted them to be afraid of him. And even towards the end, when the children were being selected for various things, and one little boy was told to say that he was unwell and he would have to go to the infirmary because that was a good chance of sort of saving him. He looked at the person who was telling that and said, "No, I can't do that. That would be lying. And Freddie says we mustn't lie." Just wonderful. He was just such a hero, really, in terms of how he behaved and the example that he gave to them. And I don't know if people are aware, but halfway through writing this book, which started off as a non-fiction biography, when I was digging through all the archives around the world, I have very wonderful contacts in Holocaust museums around the world now. And I have almost unlimited access to archive material, which is fantastically helpful. And of course, the Shoah Foundation videos are wonderful for a historian like me. But about halfway through, I realized that the information wasn't enough for me to really get under Freddie's skin and really have a sense of who he was as a person and what he was feeling inside. And so I made the decision to switch from fiction to non-fiction, but keep very rigorously to the facts. I was very well aware, as a fellow of the Royal Historical Society and as a writer of previous Holocaust books, that accuracy is everything. It's very important to counter Holocaust deniers, and it's very important for my own integrity as a writer. So I kept rigorously to the facts throughout, and only created characters where there just was a gap. I just didn't quite know exactly what had happened and the interaction between them. And of course, I had to create dialogue all the way through. But I've made that very clear at the end of the book. There's a list of pages and pages and pages of the real characters and what happened to them in real life, and then a one-page list of the fictional characters, just so it's absolutely transparent and people can see what's real and what isn't, because I didn't want to be accused of embellishing it, just for the sake of it. And I think it works. You'll have to tell me, Karen, but I do think it works, and I think you get a real sense of who Freddie is now. Like that, writing in the first person. My name is Freddie Hirsch. Please remember my name. To me, because I was able to see and read about some of the speeches that he made to the children and to members of the ghetto and in the camp, I knew that it was exactly the kind of thing he would say. So I feel and hope that I've honored him in that way.
I think you definitely have. Definitely. But I would say, you threw the word embellishing, and I wouldn't say that's definitely not the right word. I would say maybe those little bits are to join the story together, to
Exactly.
keep it flowing. And you heard about his true voice, and you heard from Susanna, and you
Yeah.
also spoke. I read it in all the everything at the back of the book as well, that you spoke to Frank Bright
Yeah.
as well, who knew, and we knew Frank. He was one of our members, and that also made me cry, seeing that he also gave you some information, and so you knew Freddie, you knew of the Freddie that you write about, and so beautifully,
Yes,
and
it was probably. I saw Frank. I was looking, wondering if anybody was still alive who had been in the blocks or who had been taught by Freddie. And I think it was you that gave me a connection to Frank Bright. And I would have gone anywhere in the world to interview him at that point. And he was actually in hospital 20 minutes from where I live in Suffolk. Just extraordinary. It was like when I first ever came across Eva Clark. I had gone to Australia if necessary, but she lived in Cambridge an hour and a half from me. So I sometimes think these things are meant to happen. But I went to see Frank in hospital, and he was a darling. He was lovely, and very sadly, he died not long afterwards. And but he was able to tell me a little snippet about him and what Freddie had done for him, which I included in the book in tribute to him. And then, of course, Susanna told me so much, and she'd also spoken to Anna Wynne, who had done a great long piece that was on the archives of the United States Holocaust Museum, and she spoke a lot about Freddie in that as well. So I had multiple sources. Very sadly, Susanna, I left her on a Friday in September in 2017, and I had pretty much everything I needed. But my plan was to go away, write up what I had, and come back in January and just go through some more questions with her and kind of piece the last bits and pieces together. And as I was leaving, she was tiny like a bird, and she grabbed hold of my arms and she said, "Do you have everything you need?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I do, Susanna. I think I do. Thank you." And she said, "Do you have everything you need?" And I said, "I do." And I left her on the Friday, and she died on the Tuesday. 90. And her family said she waited to tell you. She waited to tell you everything, but she particularly waited to tell you about Freddie. And that was an even more of another reason to write about Freddie in her name. And I dedicate the book to her because she was an extraordinary woman and I adored her. And then I couldn't find anybody else that had survived, although I had lots and lots of testimonies. And what's lovely, I don't know if anybody's ever looked at the Shoah Foundation videos, but you can actually just put in a name. So I just put in the name Freddie Hirsch and English translations, people that were speaking in English, or there were subtitles. And loads of people came up, who'd been interviewed and spoken about Freddie. And every single time I got to the bit about Freddie, I would always go a little bit before. And usually, they'd be very somber, sometimes crying. And every single one of them did exactly what Susanna did. And then they said, and then there was Freddie Hirsch, and it was just like, Freddie, Freddie, Freddie. It was just, and I thought, my goodness me, this man gave them some of the happiest moments of their lives that has sustained them ever since, in the middle of hell. I mean, it was unbelievable what he did. And the fact that they loved him so much, and Susanna and several of the survivors were the ones that raised the money and had a beautiful plaque made to him, which has been erected on a wall in the cemetery in Terezin, and that is the only memorial in the world to him. And he deserves more, and he certainly deserves this book. But I did find, after I'd written the manuscript, I found out that Dieter Kraus was still alive. And I don't know if any of your members know who that is, but there was a book written called The Librarian of Auschwitz, which was a novel based kind of roughly on her. And she was the keeper of the books. There were only 12 books Freddie was able to get hold of, and a lot of them were academic textbooks, medical books. One was about psychoanalysis. But he had these books, and they weren't allowed the books, so they hid them under the floorboards or somewhere. And Dieter Kraus was one of 3 children, actually, that were asked to keep an eye on the books. And if a German officer came in, they had to hide the books and deal with them. And Dita is still alive. She's, I think, 96, and she's in Israel. And I found her, and I thought, I don't know if she's got her marbles. I don't know if she's mentally sound. I don't know if she'll want to talk to me or anything. And I told her what I was doing, and she came straight back to me within about an hour on email and said, I need to read this. Freddie Hirsch is a hero, and he needs to be remembered. And I said, okay. And I sent her the manuscript with such trepidation, I can't tell you. I thought, oh my God, what if she hates it? What if she says I've got it all wrong and it's not Freddie and I don't know what I'm going to do? You know, it's awful. And she came back, and I'm going to read you what she said, because that made me cry too. She said, this novel is the closest possible narrative a person who didn't experience those times could have written. She said, it's the most important work which will do justice to Freddie and all those victims. It should be published in many countries. I mean, I just found that extraordinary. And then when I'd finished that and got that endorsement, I went to the United States Holocaust Museum and I said, could you send it to your verifier? Because they won't sell a book in the museum unless it's been verified as historically accurate. Again, great trepidation. This woman is a fearsome professor of Holocaust history. She goes all over the world. Amazing woman, Dr. Elizabeth Bayer. And she wrote, this is haunting and beautiful, excruciatingly vivid. The teacher of Auschwitz is rigorously researched and true to the history, powerfully conveying what a smart, loving, and energetic man Freddie was. So I just thought, well, okay, my work here is done. You know, it was just the most extraordinary pair of endorsements that made me feel that I had done right by Freddie, and made me feel that I'd done right by Susanna, because it was kind of her dying wish, you know. When she saw how animated I was about her talking about Freddie, and I said to her, I think I should write about him next. She said, please, please write about Freddie. Somebody needs to write about Freddie. And, you know, I told you earlier on, I think partly all my life experiences have led me to becoming an author of World War II and Holocaust novels. I'm not Jewish. I've got no Jewish connection whatsoever. I've gone on an absolute sharp learning curve on everything Jewish. But the 3 babies of born survivors made me an honorary Jew, which I'm very proud of. And I light my Hanukkah candles, and I mark the holidays with online with friends, and it's a wonderful part of my life. And my father, who was the least racist, anti-Semitic person I'd ever met in my life, who grew up in India and had multicultural background through his whole life, he would be extremely proud of the work that I'm doing. And I'm just sorry he didn't live long enough to see it, because he would have completely believed in it. Because like Freddie, he was that sort of person. And my husband actually said to me, you like Freddie because he reminds you of your dad. And there's a certain amount of that, you know, there is that truth in that good people attract good people in a way. And you know, he taught me so much, and he was an extraordinary man, and I feel like Freddie taught me so much while I was writing about him.
Amazing, amazing. How long? So the last time you saw Susanna, 2017. So you had already started researching Freddie, and so how long did it take to put everything together? Because obviously, then you spoke to Frank, and you spoke to the lady in Israel, and I spoke, and all your other sources, which are obviously listed at the back of the book, that are incredible.
Yeah.
A credible amount of research. So how long did the whole project take from
Yes. Well,
reading?
I wrote a couple of other books in between,
Wow.
as is my wont. Just simply because I was signed up to write other books. I wrote a book called A Woman of First, about Edna, Adan, Ismail. She's a remarkable woman, another remarkable, incredible person. She's known as the Muslim Mother Teresa, and she's in Somaliland in Africa. And she was a nurse trained in Britain. Call the Midwife. If you imagine Call the Midwife with a teenage black girl on a bicycle turning up in some of those houses in the East End of London, and children opening the door and screaming because they'd never seen a black person before, and they didn't think that anybody. One little boy said to his mummy, "Is the baby going to be black then?" They just didn't get it. And
Right.
she was amazing. And she went back to her country, which then was involved in a very bitter and bloody civil war, which pretty much ruined it. But she was part of the rebuilding project, and she was the first ever nurse there, the first ever midwife there. She had FGM done to her, and she campaigned against it her whole life. She ended up becoming the president's wife, the first lady. Then she became the first female health minister for the country, and she is 89 now and still living in the hospital, still working, still delivering babies. Amazing woman, and I wouldn't have missed that for the world. But Freddie was still tapping. He was there, and he wanted his story to be told. And then I had to go and live in California for a while and do a book there for on and off for 2.5 years. But in my spare time there, uh, going back to Freddie and going back to the research, was a joy. So really, 8 years since I met Susanna, but probably a year and a half of kind of intense writing and intense research. And it's now going to be published in 15 countries. It's already been published in Italy and England. It's being published in America in June, and it's going around the world. Upsettingly, it hasn't yet been accepted by a German publisher, which I wish it would be. And unfortunately, it won't be published in Hebrew just now because obviously the Israeli publishing industry is pretty much shut down at the moment. But hopefully one day it might be. It would be wonderful to have it in English.
Yeah, definitely.
Would love that.
Definitely. And it's we know it's in Australia because we've had photos taken by one of our members who said, "Look what I found in Australia in this tiny little bookshop," and
Yes.
a picture of Wendy's book. So
Yeah.
amazing,
Yeah.
amazing.
No, it's lovely, and I love it when readers send me photographs of my book around the world and all the different translations and the names. In Italy, it's called Il Maestro Invisibile, which means the invisible teacher. Which I'm not quite sure. I didn't quite get that. I mean, he wasn't invisible really, but anyway, that's fine. And there's a wonderful picture of Freddie kind of doing an acrobatic sort of athletic pose, as he did. Because there are they're incredible. There are some photographs of him available and online, and it was really because he set up a sort of when he wasn't allowed to be in the Olympics because obviously Hitler stopped all Jews from competing. His organization, the Maccabees, they then set up an alternate Olympics, and he was one of the great trainers there, and so the world press were very interested in this. What the Jews were doing in Czechoslovakia to counter, not being allowed to be part of the Olympics team and so on. And so they went and they took photographs of him, and Freddie was really wonderful in those photographs. There's one particular picture they'd heard that Hitler wanted a Discobulus. Do you know what that is? Discobulus was the famous Greek statue where he's kind of doing that, and so they had Freddie pose like him, and he looked just like him, and that was a deliberate pose to snub Hitler. You like Discobulus? Here's a Jew that looks like that. Get over it.
That's
Um,
right.
so,
Wow.
so there are a few amazing pictures of him, and lovely to see. His mother, his father had died. His mother and his brother fled to I think South America, and I think it was Colombia to start with, and they ended up in Peru or somewhere and never came back. And
Yeah.
his brother became a rabbi, and was quite a prominent rabbi there actually, and had a family life there. So yes, it's an interesting. I mean, rather sad family really, and considering the sadness of his childhood and his own questioning of his own sexuality and not really understanding that or knowing what it meant as a young man. That was a difficult thing for him to cope with as well, and certainly something he couldn't share with anybody. I mean, wouldn't have probably shared it with anybody in 1930s anyway, but you certainly wouldn't share it under Nazi occupation, because in certain cities, homosexuals were being rounded up, arrested, tortured, imprisoned, and they were persuaded, several of them, in order to be released from prison, they were chemically castrated. That was the deal. If you chemically castrate yourself, you can go free. And then several of them were just sent to the camps, along with, anybody else that was considered to be undesirable by the regime. So he wasn't going to be talking about that to anybody, and it was another, I think, sadness in his life. Interesting to think how and how different his life would have been if the Nazis hadn't come to power, and what would have happened to him. But that's really what interests me about these books. The three mothers and born survivors were wealthy Jewish women who had, the world at their feet, apartments in Warsaw, mill owners. They had, Friska had her parents had a coffee shop, a nice little coffee shop, a kosher coffee shop going. Anka's parents had this wonderful handbag shop that made leather goods. It's still there, still making leather goods. I've been there, and so is Eva now. And they had these, and Mark's grandparents definitely had a very gilded life with mills and so on. And had the war not happened, they would have had pretty mundane but lovely lives, peaceful lives, obviously, and it would have just been a not remarkable life, is what I'm saying. And nobody in the world would wish any of this on anybody. But the fact that some of these people then went on to become remarkable, that's what inspires me. It inspired me as a war correspondent. Which of us step up? Which of us refuse to be bystanders? Which of us decide that we're going to do something to try and counter hate and evil and stand up against it? And all of these people I write about, that is the common thread, really, that they've all done something remarkable in a bad situation. And I think that's what we really need to learn lessons from at the moment.
I'm going to agree with that, Wendy, for sure. So tell us where can everyone get the book?
You can get it pretty much everywhere, all the usual online sources, but I always say, please, please, please support your independent bookshop if you can. I'm as guilty as anybody of buying on Amazon, but I do go into my local bookshop on a regular basis and pay full price for hardbacks, because I do not want them to go to the wall along with every other high street shop. It's such an important thing, especially for the next generation, to know that they have libraries and bookshops, and we need to continue to support them, because it's a really, really tough industry at the moment for them. So that's my first request, my first port of call. And then obviously if you can't, then you can get it pretty much everywhere else.
That's great. That's great.
But
And sorry, go on.
If anybody wants signed copies, I have some book plates that I can sign, and if the AJR are able to tell me if anybody wants one of those, I can send a bunch into you, and you can send them out.
That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you. So let me know, everyone, and I'll get in touch with Wendy about that. That's wonderful. So what's next for you?
Well, I told you I like to do to jump from one subject to the other, because otherwise I think you could go quite mad. I wouldn't want to write about the Holocaust all the time. I think that would be a difficult subject to live with all the time, and I do write about other things. And I was very, very lucky to have been invited by Audrey Hepburn's son to help him write the first ever authorized biography of her. And that's a marvelous thing. And actually, interestingly, the reason I was chosen was because of my war background. Because Audrey was, I don't know if people know, she was, her father was Anglo-Irish and her mother was Dutch. And she was actually in school in Kent, in England, when war broke out, or just before war broke out. And her mother got her back to Holland, thinking that Holland would remain neutral as it had in the previous war. And of course it didn't. And she was in Arnhem. They were in Arnhem. And she lived under occupation for all those years, and amazingly survived the hunger winter there, because the Germans punished the Dutch for their resistance work by starving them and taking all their food and sending it to Germany. They took their cattle, they took their sheep, they took their crops, they took everything, and left them with very, very little. And several thousand died. And Audrey went down to virtually nothing. By the time they were liberated by the Canadians, she weighed very, very little, and she was very malnourished. And the doctors told her mother that another week or two of that and she wouldn't have survived. And the first help that she did get, apart from Canadian soldiers bringing her chocolate and cigarettes, which sparked a lifelong addiction for chocolate and cigarettes, the UNRRA came in, the predecessor to UNICEF, and they came in and they brought all sorts of wonderful things that they hadn't seen in years. And she was able to survive because of that. And it's wonderful because, of course, full circle in her life, when she gave up being a movie star to look after her family, and her two sons grew up, she then decided it was time to give back. And the way she did that was to become the first ever celebrity, really major celebrity, goodwill ambassador for UNICEF. And for the last 5 years of her life, she traveled the world and went to the most extraordinary, lawless places that she was completely advised against doing so. Somalia and dreadful places, Ethiopia, and saw the most horrendous things. And it took a great deal out of her, because she felt so deeply. She was an empath, and she felt so deeply. And ultimately, very sadly, she got cancer at 63 and died. But it's that whole story, and this biography, because there's 1,000 biographies written about Audrey Hepburn, every aspect of her life, her fashion, her iconism, everything you want. But this is about how that war thread runs all the way through her life, through her films, The Nun Story, another incredible film, different things that she did, and the choices that she made, and how that informed those choices. So it's a wonderful, wonderful project, and her son is delightful, and he lives in Madrid, so I'm flying out there in a couple of weeks to spend time with him and go through the last few chapters. Yeah, very nice. But I have another World War II story to write. They want me to write another World War II novel, and I'm toying with a couple of ideas, but maybe something about the Jews in Shanghai.
Yes, very
The
interesting. Yeah, we have a few
subject.
AJR members who took that route, and
And I need to come back to you about that.
yes, come back to us for sure, for sure. So, Wendy, I mean, I could ask you 8 million questions about all your books. I'm gonna see if anybody wants to ask you a question. Just put your hand up because we have to ask you to unmute. If anyone has a comment or a question for Wendy, um, just put your. I'm going to go through the gallery just to see, and if not, that's fine because I will come back with another comment. Um, I'm just going to suggest to everyone, obviously, please buy Wendy's book. It's wonderful. You'll meet Freddie. What an amazing man he was, and selfless and incredible story. But also have a look at Wendy online because Wendy's written so many different types of books and interesting books. And I could have, if I read your entire biography, we'd be here all night. And it's just incredible. Your work's incredible. And
Thank you. There is
you
another Wendy Holden, I should warn people. There's another Wendy Holden that writes. She started off by writing what's called chick lit, which are kind of pink, fluffy little covers. And then she's moved into historical fiction. She wrote books about Duchess of Windsor and so on. So yeah, just to let you know, my website is wendyholden.com. And I'm known in publishing as the real Wendy Holden. So
we're going to call you the real Wendy Holden.
thank you. I want to be called the real Wendy Holden.
And you are, and thank you for joining us this evening and talking about Freddie, talking about you and your other work and what's coming up and Born Survivors and just everything. And
I mean,
yeah.
I love these talks. It re-enthuses me for what I do, because I see a lot of lovely, hopeful, smiley faces, and I know that my work's important. So much of a writer's life is solitary. As my husband said, I spend a lot of time alone with my mind, which isn't altogether a healthy place to be. And despite the fact that when I come out, I want to go crazy and drink cocktails and go dancing, which we need to do sometime, Karen.
Yes.
I do spend a great deal of time in a vacuum, and it's lovely. I'm in the moment. I'm in the middle of the promotion, so I'm doing something all the time. Every single day is one more interview after another on TV and radio, and it's just lovely to be out here and talking about Freddie. I'm just so proud of this book. I always said that Born Survivors was the most important book I will ever write, and I absolutely still feel that. But I also feel this is absolutely right up there as well in terms of its importance. It's such a valuable story, and I speak a lot in schools, often with Eva, and we'll be speaking in schools in Vienna and elsewhere. And it's so important to the next generation to know about these people, and to know that it's possible for anybody to step up and be exceptional and do something exceptional and make the world a better place, which is all that Audrey Hepburn ever wanted, by the way. It's one of the things she always said. All we can do is try, each of us try to make the world a better place.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And do you want to ask a question, Evelyn? Hold on one sec. Or are you just waving? Hold on. Let me ask you to unmute. Do you want to unmute?
I think I've unmuted. Have I unmuted?
Now you have. Hello.
I don't have a question for you. I just wanted to say that was absolutely wonderful. And, you know, really, I'm not actually a gushy sort of person, but I feel sort of gushy because it's such a wonderful presentation and has aroused my interest in so many things. And I actually do have one small question. Is 100 Miracles the book about the woman with the unpronounceable last name?
Yes, Susanna Ruzicka.
Okay, thank you. That's my only little question. I really just wanted to thank you. So,
well, if anybody wants to know about Susanna, she went on to become really one of the most important Baroque musicians in the world, and she had been kept alive in her head by the music of Bach. She said as long as there was Bach in the world, then there was still some beauty in the world left in the world. And so when she came out of prison and had to go back to grade 1 piano again because her hands were in such a terrible state, she switched from piano to harpsichord because she realized that Bach had only ever played harpsichord and organ. Piano wasn't invented until right at the end of his life. And so she became this phenomenal harpsichordist under communist rule, imprisoned again in many ways. Her mother and husband held hostage while she was sent around the world to perform, and they took 80% of her income. So that's an interesting book because a lot of the book is about what it was like to be a Jew in communist times. And she spent from 1945 to 1989 enslaved into that system. And they could hardly believe it when that ended. But she was remarkable. She's still, to this day, the only person on the planet ever to record the entire keyboard works of Bach. And if you like harpsichord music personally, I can't stand it. I didn't dare tell her.
I don't know, but I know it's Wanda Landowska, and I know one's supposed to revere Wanda Landowska, but I can't listen to her for very long, I have to admit.
Well, Susanna was meant to go to Paris to train with her. She was all good to do that before the war. And she was Jewish, you know, and she...
I know she used to play in the National Gallery at lunchtime. Yes, I know.
Wow. Anyway, I mean, Susanna was just so life-enhancing and wonderful. So yes, 100 Miracles, that book's been out for a while. It's in paperback, and it'll be in everybody's library, by the way. If you don't have to buy books, you can go to the library too, and libraries need to be supported as well. So
this is it. Thank you, Evelyn, and thank you, Wendy, and thank you everyone, and have a lovely evening, and best of luck, Wendy, with this book, and everyone promote it and tell everyone how wonderful it is, and best of luck to you. Lovely. And hope to see you again.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Bye, everybody. Have a good night. Bye-bye.